Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplemental guidebook, Advanced Arcana Alternative Mana-Based Spellcasting System, designed by Carcas, Justyn, Johnston, and Luke Monroe for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, and Charles. Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Aukshi, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. Magic the Gathering is something I have a little bit of history with. It's really the World of Warcraft of collectible card games. Actually, it's probably even bigger than Warcraft because I think it was pretty much the original CCG. I played Magic like every geeky kid in the 90s. I remember when Magic came out when it was brand new. I was like 10, I think, when it came. I was like just the perfect age to get into it. Played it all throughout school with friends, you know, back of the school and band practice, just on the bus. Like, we were playing Magic left and right. So I have huge fond memories for Magic the Gathering, the CCG. I fell off of it pretty hard sometime in high school and really haven't ever felt a need to ever go back. And it's kind of become this behemoth that just gets bigger and bigger. And I'm very impressed that I guess it's stayed on top for so long now. And it's just gotten so huge, and there's so many sets, and they've done some bad stuff with it, they've done some good stuff with it, but this is all just build up to explain that I am completely out of the loop when it comes to Magic, although I am familiar with Magic. So, you know, for me, my, I was going to say generation, but my era was like the Weatherlight series, and, you know, the original set and all that good stuff, and now they've done like Ravnica and all this that I am completely not familiar with at all, even though I am familiar with Magic itself. D&D, obviously, and Magic are owned by the same company, Wizards of the Coast. I've never really enjoyed Dungeons & Dragons spell system. Record scratch. Just the whole concept of having spell slots and having to memorize spells and then having to rest to regain those spell slots, and then the levels of the spell slots don't mash up with the level that you're at. Like, you get third level spell slots at level 5. It's just needlessly convoluted and complex, and just feels like it's this really old, outdated system that they've never really changed or updated. And one thing I think they maybe tried to do a little bit of that with the 4th edition, which I think a lot of people hated, unfortunately, which is they moved to more a video game system that was like per rest and per encounter and all that. I never played 4th edition D&D. I played 2nd and I played 5th. And there were no video games based on 4th edition, but I think I would have liked that system a lot more, frankly, because I'm way more used to video game systems, and I just think those are way more intuitive and easy to run and do everything else. So this is all a build-up to explain that I am very amenable to supplements that can change the D&D Magic system. I'm totally down for that. If you can come up with a way to make that more interesting, maybe more freeing and less fiddly and a pain, then I am all for it. And adapting Magic system seems like there is some potential for that. Some potential, because as I recall, I also wasn't a huge fan of Magic the Gathering spell system either. Having draw cards, and hopefully they're lands, and you play the lands, and then you tap the lands to play the resource. All of this feels like it was just straight up made better for me in games like, you know, Hearthstone and Keyforge, where they really get rid of this strict structure of like hoping you draw your land cards and then play mana from there and having to match your mana stuff. Hearthstone was just like, look, it's just an escalating thing every time. And then Keyforge is like, screw even trying to do resources. Let's just say you can only play certain cards each turn. I actually way prefer those systems. Again, as somebody who played old school Magic, those feel much better to me nowadays than Magic system does. Which is to say, I'm not a big fan of what this ends up doing. It is a huge supplemental guidebook, and it is not only adapting the Magic the Gathering spell system into D&D, although by the title and the description you'd think that's basically what this is, but really it's a 160-page guidebook that's really kind of the Xanathar's Guide to Everything of Ravnica. Ravnica being the big popular Magic the Gathering game setting that was adapted officially to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I believe the very first time a Magic the Gathering lore book or content of any kind has been officially adapted into Dungeons & Dragons. And Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica is very cool. It does a lot of really neat things with applying all the different guilds and things, which you can see those are the icons listed here. And that part's really good. So, weirdly enough, I'm actually happy that the spell system that's used here is only a fraction of this actual guidebook, because I like the entire rest of the guidebook a lot more than the actual main focus of the guidebook, which is the new spell system. And we're going to go through it here in a second. I'm not a huge fan of this formatting, which is to say very, very plain font. I don't know if this is just Times New Roman or what, but it just doesn't look particularly good. It's very small, and yes, I know I've got it on 80% whatever for the purposes of capturing it here, but it's just, it doesn't look good compared to a lot of other DM's Guild products. The actual layout and font size and the way they've done, just everything just appears a little too small and squished together for my liking. Not enough for me to quite put it on my con list, because again, there's so much content here that kind of outweighs my fiddly complaints about the formatting. And it's all well edited and grammatically correct from what I read, but it's just a lot of, I like these, the headers right here. This looks very nice, but just all of this is just a lot to digest, and it tends to be a little wordy. You've got 160 pages, it's going to be a little wordy. So essentially, what it does is on character creation, if you're making a spell casting, and again, I'm trying to summarize 20 pages here. This is very, very all in-depth and gets into it. You have to choose 2 mana colors, and for those of you not... First of all, if you're not familiar with the Magic the Gathering system, I don't think this guidebook is for you, full stop. I don't think this is... It does some really cool things with adapting stuff for Ravnica. First of all, if you don't have the Ravnica guidebook, I also don't think this might necessarily be for you, because if you are interested enough in Magic the Gathering to put that in your D&D game, then you've got the Ravnica book. Why the hell wouldn't you have that? Well, I guess if you wanted to play specifically not in Ravnica, but use Magic the Gathering stuff, I suppose. But still, this guidebook specifically pulls stuff using Ravnica, because it's got the guilds. And the guild system is that the color for mana, which is as far back as I remember, there are 5 different colors: black, white, red, green, and blue. And that powers everything. So whatever mana you've got can power that certain spell. So the guidebook here divides every spell into one of those colors. So healing spells are white, nature spells are green. It's not going to be that hard to figure out. Destructive spells are all red. Death spells, necromancy is all black. To a certain extent, they fall pretty well. There's a few that are dual colors. But on character creation for a spellcasting class, you would choose 2 of these colors, and those are the only spells you can cast from. So automatically, it's a lot more limiting for spellcasters. Now, looking at their spell list, there's still a lot of spells available. Even if you only chose 1 of these mana colors, you would still have, I think, plenty of spells to cast. And I think that would actually make it a fun, thematic spellcaster. One of the spellcasters you can play is just the utility kind of, monkey wrench character who can just cast everything. But I think it's more fun to play a certain, you are a necromancer, or you are a fireball-wielding red mage, or use a Final Fantasy reference or something. It's you're embodying that you're a healer wizard. So then what the guilds do is it takes each guild represents 2. Let's see if I can find the section. Represents 2 of these colors put together. Here we go. So the Azorius Senate is with white and blue, House Demir is blue and black, and there's a whole, again, the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, which, shameless plug alert, you can read my Roll20 review, or watch my Roll20 review here on my YouTube channel for the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Every single one of these color combinations, there's 10 total clans, are represented here, and it is highly recommended that your character, really all characters in Ravnica, should probably join one of these guilds, because it comes with a whole bunch of advantages. You've got a bunch of role-playing and lore and backstory already set up, and then you've got basically mana pools that you want to be able to use based on what guild that you chose. So all of that works very well. It's just that the actual system itself is kind of the worst of both worlds, because it still uses the pain-in-the-ass spell slots from D&D, but then on top of that, you have to spend a bonus action, or alternatively, I think, spend all of your movement in order to establish a mana link with the ground around you, which is obviously the tapping of the land, and then you bring mana from the mana link into your mana pool, and then you have to spend mana from that mana pool to cast the spell. So on top of having to use spell slots, you're also having to tap land and use. It's just, this is, you're like, hey, you got Magic the Gathering into my D&D game. Get out, you know. If I were a big Magic fan, I can see where this would have, and the group, and more importantly, the group I was playing with were all big Magic fans. I can see the appeal, but from somebody who is not necessarily a big Magic fan but likes D&D and is looking for ways to make spellcasting, you know, more interesting and fun and more streamlined, sounds like a bad word, but, you know, more intuitive and easy to work with, this is the opposite of that. Like, having to watch your spell, this reminded me of just the worst aspects of Magic the Gathering, which is somebody sits there and says, like, well, I can do this, and that activates this, and then I'm going to tap this, and that does this. And they just, you know, their turn takes like 5 minutes of them just doing shit left and right, and you're just kind of sitting there rolling your eyes, and, you know, by the time they're done with it, you just want to slap them in the back of the head and be like, look, I'm done. I don't want to play anymore. That's how I feel. And again, this is my opinion on Magic the Gathering. So if you like that kind of thing, you're like, yeah, I want to sit there and spend, you know, several minutes on my turn pulling in mana and figuring out what spells to cast and manipulating my mana pool, that could be very, very cool. For me, very much not. I do not want to add more time and more complexity to spell casting, which is already complex enough using the whole spell slot system. The one cool bit of freedom it does add is that if you are out of spell slots, you can actually just use mana without using a spell slot, which is kind of similar to the sorcerer mechanic with the spell points, I think it's called, where they can convert, you know, that resource into spell slots. Similar to here, except it just does raw damage to you, which reminded me of like a Warlock in Hearthstone, where the whole thing was just damaging themselves in order to cast their spells, use that as their mana resource. So that part was, I like that part, was pretty neat. But otherwise, I'm just not a fan of how it actually gets translated with having to use this mana system. And then with a lot of the new spells that it adds, a lot of the ways that you bump up that system, like the, you know, if you want to use a higher spell slot, you can then use, you also have to use additional mana, what do they call them? Pool, mana points, tapping mana. There's too much terminology here. There's mana links, there's mana pool, you have to draw mana, you have to tap mana. This is just too much of a pain. I am not a fan of this system. Now, I will say before I move on, I really enjoyed this example of play, because this is the opposite of me having nightmares about Magic the Gathering. This one gave me fond memories of reading the rule book on Magic the Gathering. I remember specifically being a kid and then writing my own, you know, game rule book, because we all freaking did that, and then doing this whole, like, okay, here's what happens in round 1, here's what happens in round 2, as a breakdown of, like, here's an example of play. Because that was the first time I'd seen a game, you know, any kind of tabletop game, break down, like, here's an example of how gameplay goes. And it breaks down, like, several turns. This is the original Magic the Gathering rulebook. I don't know if they still do these anymore, what the rulebook looks like these days. And they do that here. I love that it's listed here as an example of play, literally round by round. And that's very helpful. Like, legitimately, it's helpful for me to know, okay, here's how it works, here's how they have to draw mana, they have to keep track of how much mana they have in their pool, and already I can definitely see what a pain in the butt it is here, that I really don't like it, it turned me off of it, but I like that this actual example was included, and there's 2 of them, and it kind of tells a fun little story. One of them is a thug fighting a mage in an alleyway, and the mage kind of scares him off, and then the thug comes back later when the mage is leveled up, and they have like a army of goblins, and then the mage has some fighters, and it's a bigger combat thing, and then it was revealed that the thug was, of course, the same one that he got scarred with the acid splash or whatever it was. So, also it's a really cool combat move that I never thought of, which he casts. The mage casts Tensor's Floating Disc, like a Captain America move, where it spawns it like further down, and then it ricochets back towards the opponent, which kind of like brings him forward. That's badass. I love seeing players use spells in very unpredictable ways. I thought that was just a really cool note. So I just liked reading this just to read it, even though I didn't actually like the system involved. I like that this example was actually given. And you can see here's the actual breakdown. And you can see, like, here are the black spells alone. There's really a lot here. Like, there's a bunch. If you're a wizard and you like having access to every single spell, then it's going to feel limiting. But for basically every other class, it's going to feel pretty similar to what you've got available. And in fact, for some classes, it may be even more available because I think everybody can just choose 2 colors now. Like Eldritch Fighter and Arcane Trickster, like the subclasses, can even choose 2 colors and then choose from all of those spells. So it actually breaks those classes up a little bit and gives you more freedom to cast more spells. Also, everybody, I kind of skipped over this, everybody gives access to the Summon Minion spell, which seems kind of game-breakingly crazy to give that to literally every spellcaster. And it scales as you level up. And I get that this is obviously the part of Magic where you're, the whole game is you're summoning creatures for the most part to battle each other. And it seems like game-breakingly crazy to give every spellcaster the ability to summon a creature that then scales. Now, the caveat is that obviously you can't summon very good shit even at level 1. You've got a maximum CR of 1/8, and level 2, 1/4. But still, it seems to jump up pretty quick. Like by the time you're in 4th or 5th level, you've got a pretty good, decent ability to summon some decent creatures. And the fact that this doesn't count towards your like memorized spells or anything like that is really powerful. Now it is flavorful for Magic the Gathering, but again, if you don't know Magic, then all of this is just like, well, what the hell? Why can we all summon creatures all of a sudden? So I feel like you definitely need to know Magic. You need to like Magic, and you probably need to know and like the Ravnica game setting in order to get the most out of this particular supplement. The good news is, as much as I didn't actually like the Magic mana pool adaptation system onto spellcasting, which is the name of the whole guidebook, that's only 20 or 30 pages of this 160-page guidebook. There's actually a lot more included here, which is great because I didn't like the first part of it, but there is a ton of content here. 60 new spells, most of which are drawn directly from Magic the Gathering spells, which is really neat. And again, I don't have a lot of connection to modern Magic the Gathering, so I can't say one way or the other how well these are adapted. I will say I was delighted to see that one old school spell, Giant Growth, has been adapted as Brute Force. I'm not sure why it's not just called Giant Growth. All of them have different names, but it literally a +3 to attack, +3 to damage rolls. I'm pretty sure Giant Growth was a green spell that did a +3/+3. It's just one of those random ass memories because it was a very easy, like the one enchantment everybody used for green in the original Magic the Gathering set. So I love that that's there and that's translated. And a lot of the spells are like that. Now, that's the only one I can comment on because I'm not familiar with, I think, basically any more of these other sets and where they're from, but you can see in the parentheses it's listed what sets and where these are from. But that's really cool. Most of the spells are directly drawn from Magic the Gathering cards, and this is really, really neat and interesting, especially for particularly for Magic the Gathering fans, to see these spells be directly translated into proper spells. Now, you can, I think, use most of them without actually using the mana system, which is good. But some of them are involved with the mana system. You can see they're actually color-coded. You can see pretty quickly if it requires you to manipulate your mana pool in some way. I was actually expecting more of these spells to use the mana pool because obviously these are new spells designed specifically for Magic the Gathering. But surprisingly, I don't think that's the case. Most of them don't actually use specifically mana in any way. It just is just a normal kind of spell that's, just translated over or adapted from existing spells or in some way. Like the best thing about 5th edition is it's very modular, and it's pretty easy to be able to create, not to take anything away from what this does, but it's easier to create these, new items, new spells, and everything else by looking at existing ones and saying, okay, how can I modify this to change the flavor into something that I would like to have. So very cool here, lots of really neat spells. New magic items, which are specifically drawn to Ravnica. There are 40 here, which are divided into clue stones, key runes, lockets, and signets. And these are, I assume, from the Magic the Gathering game, which these are all tied to the different guilds themselves, and they all give you various powers. And these ones do specifically have to do with manipulating mana. Usually you can draw mana from these items maybe a certain amount of times per rest, or they give you the ability to link up with a certain land that you need to cast your spells. It's very thematically appropriate and tied to, again, very specifically Magic the Gathering, and even more specifically to the Ravnica setting of Magic the Gathering. So if you're not playing in that setting, you're really not going to get much use out of any of these items, but it's really nice to see all that here, and they're all very thematically tied to their various guilds, all 10 of them. So there's 4, different types, 10 of them, and that is 40 magic items. The math checks out. New creatures, which again I assume are all from. Actually, in fact, these are actually created from the magic items themselves, from the ones that we just looked at, the key runes and all that. New magic items. So in addition to the 40 new magic items that were tied to the themes, you also get, I forget the number, I think there's over 50 here, of just generic magic items. But again, these are all drawn from Magic the Gathering, including, and even I recognize, the Black Lotus, because it was one of those insanely powerful, expensive banned cards from, I think, the original Magic the Gathering run. That's why I can recognize that one. So very, very cool to see all these. I don't think that it's listed in parentheses where these are actually from, which is too bad. Or yeah, it does, because it says the set afterwards. You can see there, UL, Rev, GOR. I believe those are the actual sets that it's from. So that's very cool. And again, these are artifacts from the original Magic the Gathering run. Again, a really cool way to translate Magic the Gathering stuff into D&D. So all the stuff that's not trying to change the systems, I think work really well. The creatures, the magic items, and the new spells inspired or directly drawn from Magic the Gathering into D&D, all of that is fantastic and for the most part works very well. But trying to change the actual magic system by building on top of D&Ds and just adding a bunch of mana cards to where literally it was like, hey, for props you can use like actual magic cards. I'm like, oh, that would just make me vomit in my mouth if I saw people whipping out their magic cards in a D&D session. Like, but if you're into that, then that's fantastic, and I think that can be fun for you. Not so much for me, but as somebody who, once upon a time enjoyed D&D, then I can definitely see myself enjoying a lot of these magic items. A lot of my friends that we all played Magic with back in the day, if I gave them a Black Lotus or something, they would immediately probably recognize the Black Lotus and that kind of thing. It would be very, very fun, and is kind of cool to see. I also appreciate there's some more artwork here with the magic items, a lot more than the other sections, which is nice to have, even though they're very tiny art, but art is good. Nice to have it around. And then finally, we get 2 adventures, which is awesome. The adventures themselves aren't necessarily super awesome, but it's just cool that you get adventures as part of this supplemental guidebook. I earlier said this was the Xanathar's Guide to Everything for Ravnica, but I don't think Xanathar's had any kind of adventure content. It was just like a bunch of rules and new ways to build characters and magic items and all that. This one actually includes adventures, a tier 1 adventure and a tier 2 adventure. They are both essentially mini dungeon crawls. One of them is a sewer basement with a bunch of kobolds and the usual rats and things. It's pretty small and straightforward, but I did like the addition that the fact that a lot of them are given specific stat blocks, which is nice to see. They're not just regular, Kobold 1, Kobold 2. They actually have different things here. And you can even play it as a single-player game with an NPC sidekick, which is really neat to see. I also like having the scaling available for easy, medium, normal, and, quote, unholy carnage for when your players have burnt down one too many orphanages and karma has come calling. Murder hobos to the very bloody end. It sounds like the literally the lyrics to a rock anthem. But I appreciate the encounter scaling right here a lot. Nice little dungeon crawl. We get included maps here. These are included as separate player handouts, so you get your DM map and your player map. You all know, if you've been watching pretty much any of my videos, I am not a fan of the Dyson Logos style, kind of etching, black and white, bare map design at all. I understand that's an old school design aesthetic. A lot of people enjoy that. For me, as someone who plays on Roll20, this is just it's not going to work at any time, at any point. I actually appreciate there's little extra details in these maps. They're not just completely blank, but it's tough for me to complain about this because the fact that we even got adventures in this guidebook is itself cool, and it's kind of sucky to say the maps aren't that good. The maps aren't that good. I mean, the layout is good. The map design is fine. I just wish this, if I had my druthers, this would be a full color, gorgeous designed map if I had to choose. It is not. I think it's still a decent map to run. The other one is a little more exciting, and I appreciate the way it actually starts up. This is from below, and it is like your characters are walking along a street. They don't even have to know each other, which is kind of an interesting. This could be a way to start an adventure, which I did a method of this when I kicked off our Shadowrun campaign years ago, our Shadowrun 5th Edition campaign, where I had my characters just in a tavern together. They didn't know each other, and then a bomb went off, and then they were like the only survivors, and they all stood up and were heroes, and that's kind of how they bonded and then started off this adventure of having to investigate the bomb and all that. So anyway, that reminded me of this, so I really enjoyed the way this adventure starts off, where the player's just walking outside this tavern, and then just blows up. They have to go in and just basically figure out what the hell's going on, and they get down to this basement and determine there's essentially a portal into the far realm that's currently being invaded, which is just kind of bananas, but really kind of interesting. A much more interesting map layout and design. Again, it's a big shame this is that kind of non-color basic. Although you get some more details here. There's some tables and chairs and all that, which is nice to see. It's not something I could just slot into Roll20 immediately, which is a bummer. But the fact that we get these adventures at all is really cool, and that they're pretty decent. Like, they're not. Tier 1 is a very kind of a standard non-story, just hack and slash dungeon crawl with traps, which is fine. And this one I think just offers just a little bit more, which is nice. I'm not expecting. I'm kind of weighing this differently because I wasn't. This is not an adventure guidebook. This is just a guidebook that happens to include some sample adventures, which are thematically tied to Ravnica. Again, if you're not running Ravnica, you probably don't need this book. But if you are running Ravnica, then I think this book can be very, very nice to have, which kind of segues nicely into my pros and cons and final thoughts for this entire thing, which we're going to get into. The rest just being listing of spells for each section. So, let's go over my pros and cons for Advanced Arcana. Pro, excellent use of the Ravnica game setting from Magic the Gathering. It pulls in creatures, items, spells, lore, dungeons. This is fantastic. It really is like the Xanathar's Guide to Everything for Ravnica. If you are using Ravnica, I would highly recommend this guidebook, even if you don't want to use the goofy extra magic system. But a part of me thinks that, if you're using Ravnica, you're probably into Magic the Gathering, so maybe that would interest you. I think Ravnica is actually just a cool setting in general. It's a giant planet-wide city controlled by these guilds. I think all that concept is really cool, divorced from Magic the Gathering. So if you're just running that as a game system, I think this is a really cool guidebook. Pro, 60 new spells, many directly drawn from the Magic the Gathering cards. That is a huge plus. New magic items thematically tied to the 10 guilds of Ravnica. Specifically 40 new magic items from the keystones, the key runes, and all that good stuff. Very cool to see, as well as the myriad of just various magic item artifacts inspired from Magic the Gathering. And the Pro, 2 mini dungeon crawls with custom monsters and counter scaling and DM and player maps, which is a really cool bonus to see. I was not at all expecting actual adventures included here, and they're pretty decent adventures, which is nice. Cons, D&D spell system plus Magic the Gathering's colored mana kind of equals just the worst of both worlds. And again, I say this as somebody who has philosophically moved on from Magic the Gathering, in that I just do not enjoy that gameplay system anymore. I once upon a time enjoyed it. I would never want to go back to that. And I really don't want to look down at people who enjoy that. I think Magic has a lot to offer, and it's definitely a fun game. But I would not want to play that game, and I definitely do not want that in my D&D system. So I'm already, leaning towards not enjoying an adaptation. And I think this one, by still using the spell slot system of D&D, and then by trying to add all this different mana system on there, is just way too convoluted and kind of a nightmare for me. So that's a big turnoff. The other con is that everything in this supplement more or less assumes you're playing in the Ravnica game setting. Now, obviously, it says specifically for Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica and Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. That I just need to be able to, stand on the mountain and shout the fact that even though Magic the Gathering is not tied to Ravnica necessarily at all, it existed long before Ravnica and it'll exist long after, I guess. This one is specifically very, very clearly tied to Ravnica with everything that it does. So it says that on the cover. You need to be fully aware that you basically all but require Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica to play this game. But the plus side is it does a really good job of expanding all of that out there. Final thoughts. Though the adapted mana system falls flat, Advanced Arcana packs a ton of welcoming content from Magic the Gathering and Ravnica into Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.